Hey everyone. So Blake Lively has altered the timeline of her smear campaign. So she is now saying that the smear campaign actually, instead of starting in late July, early August of 2024, she's now saying that it was actually ongoing from the film's production. And I've done a little bit of a deep dive previously into Colleen Hoover and the book, the controversy surrounding the book. But I think to look at what I think may have gone wrong with the smear and with this alleged smear campaign, we need to go back and look at the book's history again, the controversy it's been exposed to, and then put it all together. So, was It Ends With Us a smear campaign or a marketing misstep? So the book was it was Colleen Hoover's 2016 bestseller, and it explored domestic violence through protagonist Lily Bloom's harrowing journey. It resonated with a lot of people because it was a deeply personal narrative that was allegedly inspired by Hoover's own family's experience with abuse. The book sold 4 million copies by 2022 and spent 80 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. Colleen Hoover's 2016 novel, It Ends With Us, emerged from deeply impersonal territory, inspired by her own parents' tumultuous and abusive marriage. The book follows Lily Bloom, a young woman navigating complex relationships that mirrors cycles of domestic abuse. Colleen Hoover witnessed firsthand during her childhood. Now I'm going to pause there a minute because in my deep dive of Colleen Hoover, I actually addressed a point that it's in the book itself. Colleen Hoover actually talks about her personal experience and the inspiration for her book. And whilst I'm trying not to be judgmental, but I am a bit confused about how she was able to write a book based on an experience like what she described she had. So there was some controversy over how she was able to write a book based on her experience of witnessing her father abuse her mother when her parents were divorced before she was even 3 years old. And I quote her from the book, "She divorced him before I turned 3. Every memory beyond that of my father was a good one." Hoover describes witnessing one incident at 2.5 years old where she hears her father yelling at her mother and sees him throw a television at her, knocking her down. Now, I've read mixed reviews about her experience. Some people believe that she could have experienced the trauma she describes from that single incident at such a young age. Others are more skeptical given her age and the positive experiences since. I will say I don't know. I'm not an expert, and I'm trying not to make any judgments. However, it's I find it hard that specific details of an incident can be recalled at that age. But there we go. So for Colleen Hoover, what began as cathartic writing exercise transformed into a cultural phenomenon that would reshape contemporary romance literature. And there's the problem. It's being described as romance literature. The novel's raw emotional authenticity resonated particularly with Gen Z women who embraced Hoover's unflinching examination of love, trauma, and the complicated patterns that bind victims to their abusers. Then, in January 2023, Hoover and Atria Books announced an official coloring book companion featuring 30 illustrations of iconic scenes and quotes. So the coloring book was announced. The marketing pitch intended to be uplifting and empowering, reflecting Lily's strength and resilience throughout her journey. And this is one of the posts that come with the coloring book on Instagram. And this is what it said. It ends with this coloring book. Are you a Colleen Hoover book fan? Then your search ends with this coloring book. You are sure to feed your book addiction with 23 printable pages of different blooming flowers, book quotes, and book-inspired art. Then, in April 2023, there was a planned release date for the controversial coloring book companion, and that date is going to be important in a bit. There was immediate backlash, and the book was considered to be tone deaf. Social media storm, fans and critics quickly condemned the idea on platforms such as TikTok and Goodreads, sparking widespread debate. There were core concerns around trivializing domestic violence by turning traumatic scenes into coloring activities, which seemed deeply inappropriate. And then specific fears. Violent scenes such as Lily being pushed down the stairs could be romanticized or desensitized through coloring. Colleen Hoover received a number of very negative comments on her Instagram post announcing this, the release of this coloring book. One person says, a coloring book about domestic violence? ? Another person says, I feel like you've taken the capitalization and popularity of It Ends With Us way too far with this. There's already new limited editions, a sequel written to cater to fans, and a movie adaptation. Why this? You're romanticizing a toxic and DV relationship. What message are you trying to say to those in a situation like Lily's? To just sit there and colour in flowers? Which is a really good point. And then someone else says, this is so gross. Why make a book about literal abuse when something as lighthearted as a colour with... Why make a book about literal abuse into something as lighthearted as a colouring book? Even if there's no DV-related images in it, this is just tone deaf and tacky. I hate that this book is continuously being marketed as a sweet romance when it's a story of horrific abuse and control. All very good points. And Colleen Hoover seemed to listen. She responded very quickly. No excuses, no finger pointing. I hear you and I agree. Hoover posted an Instagram apology calling the coloring book idea tone deaf and acknowledged fans' legitimate concerns. She immediately requested the publisher halt the project, emphasizing that whilst the coloring book was developed with Lily's strength in mind, she recognized the significant misstep. And the publisher, Atria, they also reacted. They immediately cancelled the book, and they issued a public statement which highlighted respect for fans and appreciation for the honest, necessary discourse around sensitivity. Their statement read, Atria Books will not move forward with the publication of the official It Ends With Us coloring book. We developed this book to be uplifting and empowering, mirroring Lily Bloom's story. We appreciate the feedback and discourse and have the greatest respect for Colleen Hoover's fans. Thank you for the honest conversation and passion for the world Colleen has created in her books and the characters within. And there was also industry acknowledgement. There was recognition of the significant challenge of marketing books with heavy themes through traditional merchandise approaches. The book was not the only disastrous merchandising of It Ends With Us. So, Colleen Hoover also partnered with Olive and June to produce a range of nail polish as well, which had rather tasteless names for the colours, such as Brave Blush, which is on the left here. And that sparked criticism for inappropriately commercialising trauma themes. Additionally, and we will get there, Blake Lively's bright floral wardrobe during the film's promotion was also scrutinised for clashing with the story's serious domestic violence themes. So the controversy highlighted the delicate difficulty of merchandising stories about trauma and abuse in popular culture. On the one hand, you had fan concerns, marketing efforts risking glamorizing domestic violence, the trivialization of survivor experiences, and the commercialization of trauma narratives. On the other hand, you had the industry response. There were calls for survivor-sensitive approaches, needs for thoughtful consultation, and responsible publishing practices. Lessons learned and industry reflection, and there were some. The controversy sparked conversations around how to responsibly handle abuse stories in popular media. There was importance placed on consulting survivors and experts before launching sensitive merchandise. And this is what Justin Baldoni did when he was adapting the movie. He had fans, he had survivors come and read the script and give feedback, and the script was adapted with that feedback in mind. He also partnered with a domestic violence charity to try and get the accuracy, the reality of domestic violence properly do it some justice in the film. And then there's also diversity in decision making. There was a need for varied perspectives in publishing to avoid tone-deaf marketing approaches. So, thanks to Colleen Hoover's quick response and acknowledgement that, the colouring book was tone-deaf and removing it, along with the publishers, it was seen as there was a positive step towards industry accountability. However, the dialogue continues on honouring survivor story with respect and care, a challenge the publishing industry must embrace. So, what went wrong when it came to the film? These two. This is what the problem was. Because when Colleen Hoover was sat in Texas and, at Book Bonanza, and she was promoting all these floral-based ideas, she'd already been through the controversy once. She'd already experienced the backlash. She knew fine well that it was not going to be well received. But she wasn't the one pushing it this time. Blake Lively's involvement in It Ends With Us extended far beyond her role. Starring as Lily Blue, she wielded significant creative control over both the film's direction and its public presentation, making her promotional choices particularly consequential. Her marketing approach sparked immediate controversy. Lively social media campaigns encouraged audiences to grab your friends, wear your florals when attending screenings, messaging that survivors and advocates found jarringly inappropriate for a story centered on domestic abuse. Lively defended her approach by arguing that focusing on fashion and friendship reflected Lily's journey towards self-empowerment, which is what this is the same excuse that Colleen Hoover gave as well for the colouring book. Yeah, well, you were focusing on her strength. However, critics contended that this framing trivialized the traumatic experiences of real abuse survivors, reducing their struggles to aesthetic choices and lifestyle branding. And it did. Lively's producer credit meant she bore responsibility not just for her performance, but for the film's overall messaging strategy. Her public statements consistently emphasized themes of female strength and personal growth, whilst notably avoiding direct discussion of domestic violence statistics or support resources. So we all remember that.
Hello, Blake Lively here.
Colleen Hoover.
And It Ends With Us is in theaters now. So grab your friends, wear your florals, and head out to see it.
So, yeah, that kind of marketing. It didn't go well. It did not go well. And I was really confused because there were many statements from from Blake Lively. Interesting ones like, let's see if I can share my screen again actually. Okay. Sorry, I'm still getting the hang of using videos on this. Okay. So this is from Sweet and Salty Lynn. So shout out to her. But this video kind of sums up the biggest problem of the movie's marketing from Blake Lively. Colleen Hoover has always said this is a book. It's about my mum's experience, and I've got a clip on that in a minute. But Blake Lively's messaging, while standing next to Colleen Hoover quite often, which confused me why Colleen Hoover didn't actually speak out and say, "Hold on a minute, you're rewriting my mother's story." This is what Sweet and Salty Lynn discovered.
And this isn't a film about domestic violence. And this isn't a film about domestic violence.
I'm sorry, isn't the entire book and the entire movie about domestic violence, and that was the whole message?
That covers a lot of things, from first love to being an entrepreneur and opening your first shop and having all your dreams come true, to falling in love, to finding a new best friend, to domestic violence, which you don't hear all of those things in one place. But this isn't a story, this isn't a love story, this isn't a love triangle, and this isn't a film about domestic violence.
Did you guys just hear what I just heard? Was that real? Did she just say this isn't a movie about domestic violence?
It's a film about a woman because she's not defined by anything any man did to her, whether positive or negative.
It's just a movie about a woman? Did we just hear correctly? Because Are you confused? Because I'm confused.
Nope. So, and Blake Lively does actually repeat it. So, multiple times, Blake Lively has publicly said that the movie is not about domestic violence. And that completely contradicted Justin Baldoni's vision for adapting the movie and Colleen Hoover's statements that she wrote the book based on her mother's experience. Let's have a look, see what else we got. Right. So I have my lovely friend Elsrich. She has a video. She did a video contrasting the differences in Colleen Hoover's own statements about how much of the book was about her mother's abuse. And I think that's definitely worth bearing in mind here, especially when you go back to what I said earlier about the age of Colleen Hoover, not even 3 years old when her parents divorced, and all of her own experiences of her father after that were positive. I think this is quite important.
Inspired by true characters, but it was completely fiction. You know, like they were nothing like my parents. Their situation was nothing like my parents. So it wasn't like I took their story and, you know, rewrote it. It literally, the casserole scene where he hits her for the first time is what happened between my mother and father when he hit her for the first time. So that was basically the only scene that I didn't completely invent. And so,
was it difficult to write It Ends With Us?
Absolutely. The author's note at the end, you'll see just how difficult it was for me, simply because, you know, a lot of it was my mother and father's story. Of course,
Colleen, can you say that again?
you know, a lot of it was my mother and father's story. Of course, I, you know, invented Lily and Ryle as characters.
I mean, these two make sense to me now. It's not that Colleen couldn't clock Blake's bullshit. She just was respecting her craft because she was another bullshit artist. 2017, in the first interview, she tells the truth. Only one scene is really based on real life events. The rest is just tales. Then in 2022, she sits there and lies through her teeth and says, everything is true. This is me a month ago questioning the validity of this book and Colleen Hoover. The idea of marketing the book with the florals, even if your mother was a florist, which now we will never know. I don't even know that's a fact. I don't care. You don't market a book that's pretty much based on your mom getting her ass beat with florals. That's number one. Then Colleen came out the nail polish and the press on nails. She did try to come up with the coloring book for the book when it first came out with the staircase and stuff. Like, do you want us to color your mother falling down the stairs? What did you want us to do? That never sat right with me either. This is it. It's always been so weird and heavy to me. Like, this doesn't make sense. This book had no business going viral. I mean, I'm glad it helped some women and it did what it was supposed to do, but just seems this book has been full of shit from start to end.
Yeah, Elsie, saying it as it is. And I think all of these things are quite important to keep in mind when you're looking at claims that, you know, someone's being retaliated against, because in reality she's been, you know, she's received criticism, she's received backlash because of the tone deaf self-importance that she's placed on this and the opportunistic attempt she's made to use this film, use someone's experiences, and use someone else's money to market her products, her hair care, her alcohol and beverage products. And the bad marketing, by the way, let's not forget to give Ryan Reynolds a special shout out here. Probably, in my personal opinion, one of the most narcissistic men on the planet, one of the most vengeful and bitter men on the planet, and we're expecting him to take themes of domestic violence seriously, and he's overseeing the marketing. So that's where everything went to shit. Backlash from domestic violence survivors and advocates. Ashley Bendixson, domestic violence advocate, said the promotional approach was exploitative and irresponsible. Survivors deserve better than having their trauma turned into a fashion statement. Can we get a hallelujah? An anonymous person who was a survivor also made a statement that watching the trailers made me feel like my experience was being commodified. The upbeat music over scenes of abuse felt like a betrayal of everyone who's lived through this. Yep. Dr. Sarah Chen, a trauma therapist. When we romanticize abusive relationships in media, we risk normalizing red flags that could help potential victims recognize dangerous patterns early. The survivor community's response revealed a profound disconnect between Hollywood's commercial imperatives and the lived experiences of domestic violence victims. Many felt that the film's promotional strategy demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of trauma's lasting impact and the courage required to break free from abusive cycles. Particularly troubling to advocates was the targeting of young women, the demographic most vulnerable to intimate partner violence, with messaging that seemed to aesthetize rather than educate about abuse dynamics. And then we look at Justin Baldoni. His contrasting approach as a director and actor. Now, Justin Baldoni's dual role as director and antagonist, Ryle Kincaid, positioned him uniquely within the film's controversial landscape. Unlike Lively's promotional approach, Baldoni consistently emphasized the story's serious themes and its potential to inspire survivors. His public statements focused on breaking cycles of violence and supporting those trapped in abusive relationships. Baldoni collaborated with domestic violence organizations, ensuring the film's website included comprehensive resources for victims seeking help. So he had an educational focus. He prioritized the film's message of hope and healing over romantic elements. There was survivor advocacy. He partnered with organizations and promoted helpline resources. And he also spoke to survivors themselves. However, there were behind-the-scenes tensions. Reports emerged of creative conflicts with Lively over the film's messaging. Industry insiders reported growing tensions between Baldoni and Lively regarding the film's promotional strategy. Whilst Baldoni advocated for responsible messaging that centered survivors' experiences, Lively's team apparently favored approaches that emphasized the story's romantic elements and broader appeal to mainstream audiences. And that fit in with hair care and liquor. And this is one example of the difference of opinion. It's just the poster art for the film. On the left here, we've got Lily Bloom, looking quite happy, surrounded by flowers. This is Blake Lively's version. And on the right, we've got Justin Baldoni's version. Very, very different. The film's narrative choices, simplifying a complex reality. And I have always had an issue with this. I've said it in many, many, many of my videos. The way I feel about the oven scene, I feel like that is hit and miss whether you could even describe that as abuse. Because he burns his hand, instinctively he, kind of sends it off in one direction, as you do. When you burn yourself, your instinct is to just pull your hand away as far away as possible. And when I watched the film, the character was like Lily Bloom, she was standing very close to him. And my view of that particular scene was it's plausible that he just caught her by accident whilst, having a reflex reaction to burning his hand. It wasn't an obvious situation where he was angry. He didn't hit her, afterwards, like, a few minutes had passed and he was enraged and angry and then hit her. It was, to me, looked like it was part of the reflex. I wasn't the pushing down the stairs. Yes, that is more convincing. But I mean, if I remember correctly, the scene kind of cuts to her falling down the stairs. You don't actually see him push. But he was angry in that moment, so I would say that's more convincing. Obviously, the attempted to rape her, yes, that's your very clear case of abuse there. And, damaging her phone, throwing her phone on the ground, losing his temper. But she left him after that. And I've always said, well, that was quick. She didn't reach out for any resources. She didn't make any excuses for him. She didn't keep going back to him. I'm really kind of struggling. And to be honest, the one thing I really had an issue with was that she seemed to be almost openly flirting with her ex, in front of him, in front of her abusive partner. Like, in reality, you would never do that. You wouldn't do that. If you were with someone that you were scared of, you would not be taking those kind of risks. And after leaving the marriage, the first person she goes to is the ex. So the unrealistic timeline. Lily's relatively quick decision to leave her abuser contrasts sharply with statistics showing survivors typically attempt to leave 7+ times before succeeding. Simplified support systems. The film portrayed leaving as primarily an individual choice, downplaying the complex web of financial, social, and psychological barriers survivors face. And this is it. Because, they share a home, they're married, so they're legally tied together. You've got to untie all that. They've also had a child by the end of the film. So there will be an ongoing relationship. And to suggest that he's so controlling that in the moment where he's actually got her and got the most control, like they're married, they have a child together, to suggest that he would at that point agree to leave, I'm really struggling to see that. I don't know. And that's just my personal opinion. I'm not saying it never happens that way. I just feel like, having been through it, it's actually harder than ever once you have things like that create ties that are hard to cut. And I felt like the film didn't represent that at all, and neither did the book, to be honest. Limited resources. Domestic violence helplines and support organisations were relegated to end credits rather than prominently featured throughout. That bothered me a lot. These narrative simplifications, whilst potentially empowering for some viewers, risk creating unrealistic expectations about leaving abusive relationships. Real survivors often face years of attempts, failed escapes, and complex emotional manipulation that makes departure extraordinarily difficult. And when you try to leave, if it doesn't succeed, you're often facing escalation. that was my experience. Film's focus on Lily's personal strength, whilst admirable, inadvertently suggested that leaving abusive relationships is primarily a matter of individual willpower rather than systemic support and resources. This framing could leave real victims feeling inadequate if they struggled to replicate Lily's decisive action. Marketing versus message, the commercial pressure. So, whilst there is personal responsibility to Blake Lively and Colleen Hoover for the abhorrent marketing of both the book and the film, I want to try and be a bit fair here and balance this, because they're not the only factors. There are other factors. So, genre expectations. New adult romance classification created audience expectations for emotional satisfaction and romantic resolution. Commercial imperatives. Studio pressure to maximize box office returns favored broad appeal over specialized messaging. So let's not forget the Sony of all of this, who enabled Lively to go with this messaging. Messaging conflict. Tension between responsible storytelling and commercial viability created inconsistent promotional approaches. And then platform algorithms. Social media promotion rewarded engaging, shareable content over educational or sobering material. And I'm not, for anything PR, this is as far as I go with any dabbling kind of marketing or PR. I am no expert. I would always say to people, go and watch Ashley Brianna Eve. She's the goat of PR and marketing. And her videos are so informative and educational. But I would be kind of remiss, really, if I didn't say, well, there are actually other factors in this when it comes to promoting the film, promoting the book. The entertainment industry's commercial machinery proved fundamentally incompatible with sensitive handling of domestic violence themes. Marketing departments trained to maximize audience appeal and social media engagement defaulted to tactics that emphasized romance and drama over education and support. This structural problem extends beyond individual creative choices to reveal systemic issues in how Hollywood approaches stories involving trauma and social issues. So we obviously had the fallout, public and industry reactions. So the film, I think it was around $351 million globally. Despite the controversy, it was a commercial success. The film's commercial success masked significant reputational damage for key participants. Blake Lively faced mounting criticism from survivor advocates, feminist critics, and industry peers who questioned her sensitivity to domestic violence issues. Legal complications emerged as behind-the-scenes conflicts became public, revealing deep disagreements about the film's direction and promotional strategy. These disputes highlighted broader tensions within Hollywood about responsibility when adapting stories involving trauma. The controversy sparked industry-wide discussions about best practices for handling sensitive subject matter, with many calling for mandatory consultation with advocacy groups and trauma specialists during development and marketing phases. The discourse surrounding It Ends With Us became a cultural touchstone, revealing society's ongoing struggle to portray domestic violence authentically whilst maintaining commercial viability. The debate extended for beyond the film itself, touching on broader questions about media responsibility and survivor representation. And this picture, for me, represents the issue. When you look at this picture and you see them all dressed up, enjoying themselves, surrounded by flowers, jeans that have got several cuts into them, and just look like they look awful. You do not, if you were coming into this for the first time with no knowledge and no expectations, you would not be looking at this and going, oh, this is a film about domestic violence. They are promoting a book, a film about domestic violence. You do not get any of that tone from this picture. And that is the problem. So, I think, why is the backlash Colleen Hoover had to the colouring book was from her fans, her cohorts. It was not from anyone else involved, although she didn't really have anyone else to blame like Blake Lively does. Blake Lively's got an entire cast and crew she could have blamed. Colleen Hoover is an author. I mean, she could have blamed the publisher. She did not. And that's where my credit for her ends. Because I don't believe that she's apologetic. I think she was hoping, basically Blake Lively has marketed the film in the way that she wanted to market her book. And I think Colleen Hoover very much enjoyed that. I think she got behind it in the hope that if there's another backlash, Blake Lively would it hit. Because she's now shielded. She's not driving this. Blake Lively's driving this. And that's exactly what did happen. There was backlash, and it all fell on Blake Lively. A lot fell on Colleen Hoover for not supporting Justin Baldoni. But the actual marketing was, that all pretty much fell on Blake Lively. And rightly so. This was her push. But I don't think that Colleen Hoover stood back idly in horror watching, her mum's story be decimated and given colour it shouldn't have been given. Because she already attempted this herself and failed. So that tells me this is what she wanted. This is what she always wanted. And when I said the release date for I'll get to that actually. So we'll just finish these slides and I'll get to that. So the controversy, romanticizing abuse or raising awareness. So there were critics concerned. Literary and film critics argued that both the book and adaptation dangerously glamorized domestic violence by embedding abuse within romantic storylines, potentially normalizing toxic relationships for impressionable readers. The marketing missteps, promotional campaigns emphasize love triangles, passion, and romance drama, whilst minimizing the dark themes of violence and trauma that form the story's emotional core. And then tonal disconnect. Film trailers featured upbeat music and romantic cinematography that jarred sharply with scenes depicting physical and emotional abuse, creating cognitive dissonance for viewers. The fundamental tension lay in genre expectations versus social responsibilities. Romance readers anticipated emotional satisfaction and happy endings, whilst domestic violence advocates demanded unflinching realism and educational messaging. This collision of expectations created a narrative minefield that neither Hoover nor the film's marketing team successfully navigated. And that goes for Lively too. So, why did Colleen Hoover and Blake Lively both attempt to romanticize a story of domestic violence? The adaptation of Colleen Hoover's best-selling novel It Ends With Us sparked fierce debate about how domestic violence should be portrayed in popular culture. Both author and star faced accusations of glamorizing abuse whilst claiming to raise awareness. And as I said before, Colleen Hoover, I really think that she is opportunistic. I think that when it comes to domestic violence, she actually doesn't have full awareness. Whatever the experience she had as a child, it was not direct experience, as in she was not subjected to domestic violence. Her father was never abusive to her. But also, as a very, very young child, she quite plausibly could have experienced trauma from what she witnessed. But to remember specific details of that age, I'm struggling with that. And she has changed her story, as we saw with Elsie's video. You know, the story of how much of the book is based on real life has changed. Blake Lively, I just think she's completely self-absorbed and narcissistic. She has previously said that when she read about the book, she saw it as a franchise opportunity. Not when she read the book, because she didn't read the book. When she heard about the film and she was told about it, she saw it as a franchise opportunity. And we saw that in real time when she began attaching a hair care line, her drinks products and everything. And Colleen Hoover with her nail polish using, giving some of the shades names based on the abuse in the book, like Brave Blush. We saw Blake Lively do exactly the same thing with her drinks, calling one of them Rile You Wait, literally naming a drink, an alcoholic drink, after the abuser. And I think my curiosity was sparked really by why would Blake Lively seemingly make exactly the same mistakes as Colleen Hoover? And I think a lot of people thought, well, she didn't read the book, so she had no idea of the backlash with the book. But that is not true. So if we just go back a bit, here, the adaptation announcement was January 2023. Blake Lively was already brought on to the film at that point. The planned release date was April 2023. If we go to the timeline, the Exhibit A timeline from Wayfarer, they were well into talking about the script, having chemistry testing. They were, the production was underway. They would have been well aware. Blake Lively would have and should have been aware that Colleen Hoover had just experienced huge backlash for trying to market a colouring book based on this film and trying to be all floral and positive and we're trying to focus on Lily's strengths and not her, not the abuse itself. and she would have seen the backlash. She was there. She saw the backlash that Colleen Hoover had from the colouring book. So, and I cannot imagine that it was not discussed in these meetings. You know, Justin Baldoni would have been aware of it too. Even if he didn't speak to Colleen Hoover, which he clearly did, then he would have seen, you know, the news, social media. They monitor this stuff. Blake Lively would have been made aware that Colleen Hoover tried to undermine the domestic abuse part of this story and bring out, you know, all these fluffy, floral, positive things, merchandising to market the book. And fans had this huge backlash. And we keep in mind that the backlash at Colleen Hoover was on a much smaller scale because it was only really her book fans, right? Which are huge. Don't get me wrong, they are. That's a huge amount of people still. But when Blake Lively inexplicably tried to replicate the same actions, she was doing it for the movie promotion, which was then a global response. So when you put into context that just in the book world, the book fans, the size of the backlash that Colleen Hoover received for a colouring book, you can understand why Blake Lively had such a huge, huge, huge backlash, because she went further. She didn't just bring out a colouring book and then pull it back and go, yeah, do you know, I was wrong. I misread that situation. I'm sorry. And move on. Blake Lively was absolutely determined that she was going to push her hair care products and her friends' clothing, her friends' songs, her drinks, and her husband. We had to hear about him all the time, even though he'd just come up down from his own massive success. And she was resolute. She was pushing and pushing and pushing. And if anyone said no, she basically trampled over them. Anyone in an interview brought up domestic violence, she scoffed at them. Or she eventually, as we saw in the videos, went further and said, this book is not about domestic violence. She fully denounced the domestic violence. To our knowledge, she didn't work with the domestic abuse charity no more that was partnered with the film. I think she only on one occasion did she put up a brief post on her Instagram. I don't think it was posted. I think it was on a story, so it would fall away, you know, not long after. Of resources, phone number for a domestic violence charity. And when I look and I see Blake Lively has changed the story and is now alleging that there was actually backlash during the production, I think she's talking about the book, Colleen Hoover's backlash. She is trying to say it was starting then, but she has reframed it as retaliation because it's not her fault. It's never her fault. None of this is her fault. It's got to be Wayfarer's fault. And she can point to something, to backlash, and say, look, this was happening at this time. This happened in January, February, whilst the production was ongoing. And there is something plausibly there. There are social media posts, social media comments, videos of people outraged by the colouring book. It had nothing to do with Blake Lively. That was backlash against Colleen Hoover, and Colleen Hoover and Atria Publishing both acknowledged that was the case. But Blake Lively appears to be trying to reframe this alleged smear campaign to encompass that backlash as well, because there are social media posts that she can bring into this. And I don't believe there is ever been a smear campaign, for the very simple reason that when she subpoenaed 107 content creators, if she had really believed that there was a smear campaign and there was something there to prove, she would not have withdrawn them so quickly without getting anything. She got literally nothing. She didn't fight it at all. I mean, she only fought Perez's for 5 minutes. In reality, she gave up as quickly as possible there. And the only reason that Andy's is still, that Popcorn Planets is still there, is because he spoke to cast and crew from the documentary. For his documentary, he spoke to the Ends With Us cast and crew. And she is more than likely trying to get at, well, what did they say? What did they tell you? That is the only difference. It's not because she's concerned that there's a smear campaign. Because if she really believed that, she would be moving heaven and earth to prove it. And she's not. With my own subpoena, as soon as I filed a motion to quash, 2 days later, without any response, she withdrew the subpoena. Now, if she really thought I was part of a smear campaign and I had information to prove this, she would have tried a little harder. She had way more resources than I do, than any of the content creators that she's subpoenaed. She's got more resources than all of us combined. But she didn't see it through. Why? Because she knows there is nothing there. There is no smear campaign. There never has been a smear campaign. It is backlash she experienced in the same way that Colleen Hoover experienced backlash, but she experienced far more of it because her promotion was on a global scale, so therefore the backlash was on a global scale. Colleen Hoover's colouring book for the film, for the book itself, was on a much smaller scale, but they were Colleen Hoover fans that criticised Colleen Hoover for the colouring book. That is just some thoughts I have on this. I don't know if it's what's happened here, but I can't see any other explanation for it. I just do not believe that there has been. I don't believe there was any sexual harassment. I don't believe there's retaliation. There's nothing to retaliate against, in my opinion. And my own personal experience of being dragged into this lawsuit tells me that there's something missing here. None of this is making sense. And to now be changing your story, and when you look at the timeline of what happened, I feel like I can see where she's trying to make this fit. So, conclusion. The fundamental challenge. Hoover and Lively's struggles reflect the inherent difficulty of balancing storytelling craft, audience expectations, and social responsibility when addressing traumatic experiences through popular entertainment. Lessons for future creators. The controversy underscores the critical need for clear, consistent messaging when portraying domestic violence. Mixed signals can undermine both artistic integrity and potential positive impact on survivors. And a path forward, just a suggestion. Moving forward, creators must prioritize meaningful engagement with survivors and advocacy organizations from development through distribution ensuring authentic representation that empowers rather than exploits. And can I just point out here, right, that during the filming of a film about domestic violence, I don't care what she says, it was supposed to be about domestic violence, and that was Justin Baldoni's vision when he optioned the book and decided to adapt it into a film. So I am going with that. Right? Did she speak to any of the organizations that she had write her amicus briefs? No. She just leaned on them when it was, it suited her cause. The Ends With Us controversy serves as a cautionary tale about the complexities of adapting trauma narratives for mainstream audiences. Whilst the intentions behind both book and film may have been honourable, the execution revealed critical gaps in understanding survivor experiences and the potential impact of romanticized portrayals. Future projects addressing domestic violence must learn from these missteps, but prioritizing survivor voices, and that is important. Consulting with trauma specialists, also important, and maintaining consistent messaging that honors both artistic vision and social responsibility. Only through such thoughtful approaches can popular culture truly serve survivors whilst educating audiences about these crucial issues. And at the bottom, I'm going to do something that Blake Lively should have done, and Colleen Hoover for that matter. If you or someone you know needs support in the UK, we have the National Domestic Violence Helpline. Their number is 0808 2000 247, and their website is www.ncdv.org.uk. And in the US, there is the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Number is 1-800-799-7233. Their website is www.thehotline.org. And if both of these websites have other ways to contact them, you can live chat them. There's a number for text messaging service, and there is loads and loads and loads of resources. So if anyone is experiencing domestic violence, then please do contact these charities wherever you live and seek some help and advice. That's all from me. Thank you for listening, and I'll catch up with you all really soon.